Hey everybody, Efrem Smith, and welcome to City Beats. So glad you are back. Here, we talk about how we engage the subcultures, how we engage the issues of being urban, because we are in an ever-increasing multi-ethnic, multicultural, metropolitan reality. The majority of the people on the planet live in cities, will live in cities. This will just continue because what used to be the suburbs feels like the city, and what used to feel like the rural area feels like the suburbs. It's like urbanization just keeps going. So what does it mean to be people of faith, people of impact, people of transformation and empowerment in this reality? Welcome to City Beats. Hey, I encourage you, follow us on the YouTube channel. Subscribe. I mean, you might be watching this, but you haven't hit the subscribe button yet. So you got to do that. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell people you don't like for real. Because remember now, nobody knows what the producer, the person behind the scenes looks like. And if we get to 1,000 subscribers, he's going to show his face on City Beats. He's going to be on an episode. I'm looking at him right now. He's yawning. And once again, like every episode, he's saying no. But I have faith. All right? So subscribe. All right. I have been so looking forward to my guest for this episode of City Beats. I have talked to her for probably a year or more about being on City Beats. And she's like, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. I can see if I can fit it in my schedule. I'm so busy. I don't know. But finally,
I
get Irene Siniy-Bailey on City Beats. Welcome, my sister.
It's good to be here.
So glad to have you here. So I should tell you about Pastor Irene, that she is involved in adult ministries here at Midtown Church. That's the other thing. In the past, I've been talking about being a part of Bayside Church, the Midtown campus, but it's official, y'all. We are Midtown Covenant Church.
Woo-hoo.
Yes, so we're no longer a campus of a larger multi-campus church. We are the multi-campus church. We are Midtown Church in 2 locations, Sacramento and Elk Grove. And Irene Siniy-Bailey is one of our pastors. She's involved with adult ministries. You've been involved in communications and marketing.
Every hat in COVID land.
Our online worship experience, our classes, just everything.
I love our church. I love that I get to serve it. And you just made me think of the day that I realized we got to work together. I had started, and you had just started, because before you're just teaching.
Yeah.
And I had just read your book, the Jump book.
Oh, yeah.
Right before that, because we were moving back from the Bay Area.
Thanks for the plug, by the way.
Oh, if you haven't read it, you need to read it. I think your analogies and the metaphors that you use, but I could also just hear your authentic teaching voice coming through it. Just really thinking about faith in bigger ways and seeing the bigger picture, but you also weave everything we talk about all the time: multicultural living, passion, purpose. So if you haven't read it, read it. But I read your book right before God told me to jump into ministry again, into an official role, because I was a little hesitant. You don't see a lot of female pastors. I didn't think my call would lead there. But I remember meeting you and actually being nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, I just read Efrem's book. I respect him so much. And here he is just like, hey, what's up? We're going to work together. It was just a surreal moment. I remember feeling really excited to meet you that way.
Well, I appreciate you being on team with you. And so as I normally do, I start out these City Beats episodes by asking if you just happen to be a fan of comic books or superhero movies.
I am a fan of the Avengers movies.
Oh, okay. The Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I don't know comics, but I turned a leaf a couple years ago, 3 years ago, because my husband Jason was really into the movies, and I would enjoy going to the movies, but I didn't understand all the intricacies of the stories.
Yeah.
So I committed to watching them in the chronological timeline. So I started with not Wonder Woman, Ron universe. I started with Captain Marvel.
Oh yeah.
And so I got to watch them all. And y'all, it changed my life.
Because what's the funny thing is, even though Captain Marvel came later in the movies, it's really early in the
She's
chronological order. Like you'd start with Captain America, the first Avenger, and then from there, yeah, you pretty quickly make your way to Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
And then forward. So, okay, so your favorite...
I said that to say if you're someone who goes, it's too far, like the Avengers multiverse universe is too much for me to catch up on, I go, there's hope for you. Watch them chronologically. You'll get inspired like me. The stories are good.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
The stories are rich. There's so much to unpack. Maybe except for the Iron Man movies. Those are my least favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Not a fan of them.
I like Iron Man when he's in Avenger movies more than I like him in solo movies.
Yeah. I like
for some reason.
His leadership role. He's working on himself. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your favorite Marvel movie?
It's got to be still Endgame.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. There's just, I think all the conversations that happened around it, first of all, was shocking. I think it was that I'll never forget that moment in the theater, where everyone's just, there's just so much to celebrate and so much to grieve. And I think it's just the power of the story. But also, as much as we don't like Thanos, there's a lot to unpack and like makes you think of evil differently and how everyone has their own purpose and call that they're working towards. What is it? Good or bad?
Marvel is good at causing you to feel for their villains. Like you don't want to, but all of a sudden you feel a little bit for Loki.
Yeah.
You feel for, you kind of go, I hate to say this, but I kind of understand Thanos. Oh, I hate to say this, but I kind of understand Killmonger. I mean, man, but he's bad.
Well, it's kind of, we kept talking about WandaVision. We're like, is she good or bad? And like that cusp of like, we don't know.
Yeah.
It just showing the complexity of humanity while also they're superheroes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's especially was true in WandaVision. Like the conflict of, is she causing the turmoil? Is she being held captive by the turmoil?
Yes.
So.
That was so good.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So glad you like.
Well, but good segue is
movies.
Black Widow's coming out.
Yes.
And I'm excited about that one.
I wonder why that would be. This is a great segue to your story.
Yes.
So, okay, let's go there. Share about your background, because you have, and it's the reason why I wanted you on City Beats is because, Sacramento is one of the most diverse cities. A lot of times in California, Sacramento finds itself in the shadow of Los Angeles, in the shadow of the Bay Area. But Sacramento itself is one of the most multicultural, multi-ethnic cities in the United States of America. And so you can't just see Sacramento as black and white. I mean, it's just so diverse. And your story speaks to that diversity. Yeah. So let's start there.
Okay. Well, I'm actually a first-generation immigrant. Mm-hmm. So my family moved here to Sacramento when I was 5 or 6. I was the youngest in my family. We came on literally a religious asylum sanction that we were able to receive paperwork for from the USSR. Mm-hmm. So I'm Ukrainian and Russian and German. My grandma was German. But we lived in Ukraine. I was born in Ukraine at the time, the USSR. And so we came here because we had family and we got placed here in Sacramento. There's a huge, big wave of immigrants that came.
Like the breakup of the Soviet Union?
Right. I feel like it was right at the cusp. So it was 91 or 92. I have to track my age. But it was already when the USSR was about to fall. So the coverage in the U.S., I can't always speak to that. I love meeting people and going, what do you think happened? Because media tells its own story. And every country told its own story on the USSR and the Iron Curtain falling. But it was already really weak. So at that point, it was really easy. I mean, it's considerably easy to get the right paperwork in to hopefully get religious asylum and be able to come to the U.S. And so my parents were in ministry and thought they were coming to the U.S. to really explore ministry and not be in oppression. Because Christianity was illegal in the USSR. And so living, just choosing a very different life. And really, I remember we crossed, I remember it was a secret when we were leaving just because it was still, if the wrong people found out, they could stop your paperwork, they could stop your process. It was really you're coming for a freedom of religion. That was generally my parents' choice. And
So how did they have to frame why they were coming to the United States?
it was the freedom of religion. That
Okay.
was a part
Oh,
of the
okay.
paperwork. Yeah, just like right now you can meet refugees or religious asylum people because maybe they're in a war-torn country or there's famine. We have a lot of Afghan immigrants here in Sacramento. A huge World Relief in Sacramento is doing a lot of work with helping people assimilate and integrate and just learn even how the U.S. works. That was a big part of my story, right? My parents came with 3 kids and all their belongings in some suitcases, and most of it got lost on their way here. We don't know if it was someone interrupting, where our luggage was supposed to go, but $500 in their pocket. They had some family here, so there's some community to make. But most of my story was just, right, you leave your home country and you leave your culture. Nobody wants to leave their home country. If there's something going on that's not allowing you to live
Yeah.
well, live healthy, live a life that isn't day to day. And so you come here and I just sometimes put myself in my parents' shoes and just think, you don't even know English. My mom started practicing English before we came, but how much fear and courage that took.
Wow. So for you, through elementary school, middle school, high school, was there a period where, well, I'll just say among other white kids, did you still feel different, other, or did you feel like, pretty soon you felt like the average American, or if that's the right way to say it, or like how long in your journey did you go, I feel like they know that there's something different about me?
Yeah, I would say part of the most immigrants, I think, at least my age, I can't speak for what current history is being made too, but assimilation in America is this expectation to put aside your cultural identity and act the part. That was my experience in America. So I think there's a big point for me was just when my parents, they're working around the clock. They don't even have time for family meals because you're just trying to make it in America. Working around the clock, just trying to pay, they decided to put their resources towards a private Christian school. So I went from a really multicultural, multi-ethnic, very average public school where everybody had a story, everybody was different. Knowing specifically my weird lunches didn't get made fun of because my best friend was from China and her lunch smelled funny too, right? We were just going through childhood together. And so I've got plopped out of that environment and put into a very all-white, white private Christian school. And I still remember my first day there, and I didn't think anything was wrong because as a child, you're just receiving the messages being sent to you, right? Just sort of fit the part, play the role, be popular, make friends. We're all kids. But my teacher should have known better. I would say this, but my first day, my name was Irene, not Irene. That's a good giveaway. I did legally change it later on to match all the legal documents that happened with it. But I come to the school.
And was that specifically just because so many people, the way you were treated or seen by being called Irina?
Yeah, there's a shift that happens, right? We all had very Russian names, and you look like an American because you're not wearing. I mean, I didn't even know what Target was for a long time. We just shopped at thrift stores, whatever we could. And so I get put in this school that's pretty, I would say, wealthy in the sense that everyone had privilege. And this, even if you were low income in that school, you had privilege because you knew how to navigate the systems around you, right? As an immigrant, you're always aware someone's trying to swindle you, take advantage that you don't speak the language. My parents lost their savings multiple times because someone took advantage of them. Whatever it is, but I came into a culture that was very white, and still I remember the first day, the teacher, they had those nameplates on those desks, where they wrote your name.
Yeah.
And so her first question to me was she wrote down my name, which is obviously she got it from papers, right? She wrote down Irina, but she also put right next to it, Irene. And she just said, I didn't know if that's what you wanted to be called or if you wanted to be called this. And I was like, I look back on that now and I go, that's so weird that you would ask a child, what do you want to be? It was in its own way very disrespectful. She was putting her own cultural identity on me.
I'm sure you don't want to be called this. You'd rather be called this, right?
Of course. And as a kid, I'm going, Irene sounds pretty. I mean, right? I'm thinking
Right.
I'm a child looking for my individuality at the same time. And so I changed my name that day. And my parents didn't care when I went home because in Russian, it didn't change. We'd only spoke Russian at home.
Yeah.
It didn't change. They're like, whatever, that's fine. And we went and legally changed. So I spent my adolescent years and teenage years going by Irene. So then by then, from competing in speech and debate, you name it, whatever you do when you're involved, your name's Irene. So I ended up legally changing it. So applying to college would be easier.
So, so tell me the original name again, though, is
Irina.
So Irina Siniy?
That
was your name.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I mean, I'm not saying you got to go back.
I was named after my mother too.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Right in that one pivotal day,
Yeah.
I didn't realize the cultural divide happened to me my first day at this school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, becoming Christian,
Mm-hmm.
what was that like? I mean, you grew up in a Christian family.
Yes. So,
your first experience with church in the United States was still ethnic specific. So talk a little bit about Russian church and your journey in becoming a Christian.
So Russian church was my experience here in the U.S. was something that I think really fell into the trap of legalism. So my introduction to God was very legalistic because the church had found the way the church expressed itself underneath the oppression of the USSR was to look very different than the average person that pledged loyalty to communism. Just what it could be, how you look, not wearing a lot of makeup. So it kind of went to very traditional, like biblical, right, extrapolation of women be modest, wear a headscarf to, don't drink, don't gamble, don't play with cards, all of those little things that can start as simple acts of solidarity, simple acts of community, because you're trying to, my mom one time was held hostage because the Bible is found on her for 2 days. Like that, those kind of punishments just happened if you showed loyalty to something that wasn't the government, right?
Yeah.
So I think that kind of faith translated itself into the U.S. here. There's really big Slavic churches here in Sacramento because most people who did come during that big wave when the Iron Curtain was weak was for religious asylum. People just wanted freedom because they'd only experienced. And
so Slavic church is the more correct way to say it.
Yeah, Slavic can capture, Ukrainian, Russian, Romanian. There's a lot of us who our cultures were ripped from us when the USSR became one country. So, for example, it could be in Ukraine, Russian was the national language. So my parents didn't teach me Ukrainian, but I have friends whose parents did. So they're able to speak Ukrainian. It's much harder. I'm still struggling to keep up with Russian because it's so hard. But so those kind of churches formed as Slavic churches, Russian churches, mostly Russian being the main language being spoken. But I would know people who are from different origins in the Eastern European world. So, so in my expression here in Sacramento, going to church, I felt like church was very traditional, very Baptist values. Russian Baptists dress up. We dress up real nice for Jesus on church. You know what that's
Black
like?
Baptists.
Yeah. Sunday is a long day. Your service could go on
like
for
Black
hours.
Baptists.
Yep. You've got lots of meals happening right afterwards.
It sounds like Black Baptists.
Sunday is a whole thing. It's a whole community
Black
experience.
Baptists and Slavic Baptists could get together.
We could. We
we're
could.
probably not cooking the same thing at the
Not even
meal in the
close.
fellowship hall, but but that sound like, they're, dress up, they're a long time, eating afterwards, just to go back to another service.
The minute you could talk, you're probably up on stage at main church presenting something, speaking something, right?
Man.
Absolutely. Yep. We have totally similar roots. But it was boring as heck.
Well, I wouldn't say black church was boring, but it was just long.
Pastor E, we didn't have good music, though. Russian Baptists, we didn't even clap. It was, people would just come in.
Oh, yeah. Well, then that's where we were different.
Traditional choirs.
Black Baptists get mad if you can't clap.
We didn't get down. We couldn't get down.
Bob your head or something.
You were trying to stay awake half the time. That was my journey. But yeah, it was just, I knew of who God was, and but I found a lot of freedom when I went to a couple American churches.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, just non-denominational, Presbyterian. And it was worship that opened me up to going,
Yeah.
wow.
Well, back up a little bit though. When were you baptized? You became a Christian
Well, that's
in
a
the
good.
Slavic church, or
I became a Christian. Remember that Christian private school my parents sent me to?
Yes.
That is where I gave my life to Christ.
Okay.
Because we had chapel, we had people teaching about God. And so I definitely came to Jesus kind of going, I don't want to go to hell. And I know God's real because I've grown up around him all but did I have a personal relationship? But so it's definitely a fear decision, more of like that fire and brimstone feeling. But it definitely grew to relationship because I just started falling in love with being taught how to read the Bible and understanding and seeing the stories come to life and then seeing God move in my life of just, the Holy Spirit became active in my life. And even as a teenager, just helping me maneuver and discern things. And so I think some of the buffer of my acculturation or assimilation story is the Holy Spirit protecting me and not being offended sometimes or maybe letting something glaze over. But definitely the Lord walked me into my 20s later on. That's a different story to unpack all that because that did strip away my identity for a long time. But really thankful to have started walking with the Lord at like 5th grade and kind of falling in love with him passionately. Yeah.
So I'm gonna go a little forward here and go. For a while, you worked at a shelter for women coming out of abuse.
Yes.
So what led you there? Was that just kind of, hey, you had a heart for mission, for something in the nonprofit world, but what landed you specifically at a organization committed to providing refuge for women coming out of abuse?
Well, for me, that was just a model I really admired because it wasn't just shelter. It is actually a program here in town, and it really helped people break systemic habits within their families or generational bondages because it wasn't just about helping one woman or one child. It was about helping them get clean or get the tools they needed to get off the streets and then help them learn how to have a home and maintain it and keep a job. So it was very...
So these women might be there not just because of an abusive home or relationship. It could be because of addiction, the need for recovery.
And not being able...
They're
once you're
homeless.
evicted, you can't get another place.
Yeah.
If someone's not backing you up, people don't know that that's how the system's built. You make one mistake, it's stacked against you for life. And if you have a kiddo and you can't have childcare for your kid to go to work, you can't hold down a job. So
I still don't understand how on one hand, California talks about itself. I mean, we talk about, I've been here long enough now where I can say we, like, like I'm,
me too.
I'm Californian for real now, so no disrespect to my Minnesota roots, my Minnesota family, but you're not going to see me there in the winter, tell you that.
Or to Russia in the winter. Don't send me there.
Yeah, what's colder, Minnesota or Russia in the winter?
Russia, you can't survive without a fur coat, and then you can't be vegan
no matter how
much
you want.
you
The big fur
want to.
hats too.
Yeah.
The big fur hats. So what I was going to say is, California, we talk about, on our own being one of the largest economies in the world. And yet this homelessness epidemic we can't solve. And so, talking about your experience working with women that had been addicted, evicted, in abuse, but this whole, like, you're evicted and you're on the street and trying to find housing again. Like, I still don't understand how we can be one of the largest economies in the world by ourselves as a state, and yet we can't solve that issue. But was it in that role that you've had a sense of call on your life, a sense of deeper life mission?
Actually, my call probably came way earlier. I think it started in high school. I was super involved in ministry, really passionate. I didn't see women leading in the church. Even if I went to a church that had female pastors, they were so behind the scenes. I never saw them preaching or anything. And I definitely had a preaching gift, but I was able to use it in youth ministry. I was able to use it speaking at student camps or things like that. But I didn't, well, you don't know what you can be when you don't see it. And because of my more Baptist roots, definitely more complementarian values, very, you know, is attention. Absolutely.
So the church you grew up in, women didn't preach.
No. And then the church that I attended, the Protestant church, the American English speaking church I attended through high school, my parents blessed me to go to my own church because I just was on fire. And I found out later on there's a woman pastor somewhere, but she was doing mostly counseling or therapy. But I wouldn't have seen that in a church that was very multi-generational. I was in the youth group. So even if I was given an opportunity to be developed and mentored into more of a pastoral role, I would turn it down for a long time because I just thought I was still backing up values I was taught. Women don't preach or teach, and I hadn't been underneath the teaching of a woman. So I didn't know what that was like. I still remember the first time I was under the teaching of a woman and I went, why do I want to be opposed by this? But when I read the gospel, it actually doesn't oppose that, but someone taught me that. Right? So you have to deconstruct your own.
Yeah. You know, you saying that, it reminds me of a conversation we had when we were meeting. So we'll take people behind the scenes even more of like you and I sitting down in my office, and I said, okay, so let's talk about your sense of call. You know, tell me about your sense of call as a pastor. Mm-hmm. How do you know you're a pastor? And your answer really caused me to go, okay, I have to frame this a little different when I talk to my sisters about call, because your response to me was, I don't know, not because you were struggling to hear from God, but because of how your experiences in the church didn't make room or give visible expression to seeing yourself in a pastoral role. Yeah. So you helped me understand that in so many cases, it can just be so natural for a guy to talk about their sense of call as a pastor because they've grown up seeing other men preaching, some of them starting very young, as early as high school. And so they're seeing all these examples of going, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. But for women, it's a whole different journey because you could be wrestling.
I was called a leader.
Yes.
I was called a leader, a great communicator, a great organizer, whatever it was, right? But it was never, oh, that's a future pastor. Like that just wasn't. It's the same as we always talk about, you know, telling boys they can be doctors and girls they can be teachers. It's just the classic that happens in the church, and it's because of that complementarian, egalitarian theological interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah, and with respect, even though I respectfully disagree, you know, with my complementarian brothers and sisters, because there are some sisters with the complementarian view as well. I grew up in a church where if men could go up in what they called the pulpit and, preach behind the podium, the sacred desk of God, but the women had to stand, below that pulpit, and they could preach behind, well, they wouldn't even say preach, they could speak from behind a music stand. I remember the only woman that could come up and speak at the same level as the male pastors was the church secretary when she came and read the announcements for the week. And it was through television that I saw, women preachers, that I saw Claudette Copeland preach. And praise God, by the time I was in high school, there was a church in my neighborhood where I was very involved in the youth group. And it was through that church that I would eventually hear preachers like Dr. Renee Rochester and Zena Jacques and Madeline Mims. And that really framed my understanding of who's called to preach, who can pastor. So let's just, I want to go here to, I'm egalitarian. I'm honored and privileged that we have women pastors such as yourself and Krista Armstead, who's been on an episode, Melinda Watts, who I have to get on here on an episode. So we have women pastors here at Midtown Church, but let's talk about, I mean, you know, as one who desires to not just preach and teach an egalitarian position, but live this out in ways that are empowering and liberating, what is it that I still need to know, to grow in, to embrace?
That's a big question.
I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm going, I think I'm asking it that way because I never as a man want to get to a point where I'm kind of like, you know, oh, I figured this out. I mean, I've got women on my staff. We let women preach here and there. Hey, we call women pastor at our church. Like,
yes.
I always want to go, no, I think the way you stay on the journey of this egalitarian position, on this view of women being called to lead at every level, in every way, pastorally in the church, is you've got to stay on the road of learning and growing.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking of my own journey, I thought I'd be a missionary. Then God pulled me back into city life, helped me get out of Christian education and made me get a sociology and race and ethnics degree just to pursue what I was passionate about. And God unpacked it at work in me. And the shelter I worked in, that was me trying to go, well, maybe nonprofit development is where I get to use all these gifts. And my leadership is celebrated, and then God called me back to ministry after a youth ministry stint. I thought I was done. You follow the voice of God. That is the first thing about leadership that I believe within the church has to happen. When you said, what do I have to do to not be a man who thinks I've got it, I've arrived, I've supported women, I'm like, I think that's just the posture of any leader. How do we avoid being anyone who arrives somewhere in life and thinks we've got it? We're done learning. We're done seeing the richness that God is doing in the world, where he's moving and changing culture and shaping culture. And I think that's really where I would say all of us need to start. Not just, I appreciate that you asked the question, but I see bad leadership everywhere. And a lot of it starts from, I don't need to learn, or once I've studied something, I've closed the door on it. I've got my proof, my truth, whatever, and I go on thumping people with it, or build my organization or my values around it. And I think values keep getting developed because none of us have lived this life more than once.
Yeah, because we can do this in the area of gender or in the area of race, where we can say, look, I've got a black guy on staff. Look, I've got a brown guy.
You've got your Ukrainian.
Look, we've got our Ukrainian, German, Russian woman on staff.
Yeah.
We've done it.
Well, Pastor E, this is what I appreciate with me discerning my call and me stepping into, a space that isn't always welcoming to women in the broader church world. You could read the wrong blog post and your morale could just get shot through the roof reading what people really think about female pastors, or in any kind of context. People have their opinions. But when I started moving into, being a pastor to adult ministries and things that we do here at church, this was really important. I think I told you this one time we met, and I said, it's important for me as a white woman. Yes, I have a cultural identity that's, got lots of flavor in me because of my journey, but I'm still a white woman. I've carried on the privileges of a white woman in my assimilation journey. Those are things I unpack daily. But it's important for me in our church that then I submit to someone who is a person of color, and because then I honor our church's diversity. I honor our community's diversity. That was important for me to talk to you and Pastor Bob about. I said, I have to make sure I'm being mentored and developed. Even as a pastor, I'm submitting to someone else who carries a different cultural lens than I do, because it will only bless the people we serve with their leadership gifts amplified. I want to be able to submit to someone who helps me honor my call by better learning, getting feedback, and being developed in order to be in our multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational church. Does that make sense? Like,
yes,
sometimes,
indeed.
So that's my posture, and I think that's what you're saying too. Like, how's my posture going to be someone who keeps learning? And I go, I think we're always life learners. Then we have to look at how we're learning.
Yeah.
Who are we submitting to? Who are the voices in our lives? And I think God is always inviting us to grow in those areas. And so, for me, I just think, why can't that apply to you too, right?
Yeah.
Checking who's around you. Who are the voices around you? Do they reflect the values you say you have? Or are your values just words you speak? And that, then we're talking about integrity, but I love values. I love talking about the values I had 3 years ago. I don't have because they've grown. They've just been, there's a lot of work that goes on in you. And I think some people forget that life is this learning journey, and you've maybe kind of how the Russian church did, right? The values we established, we took them over here, and actually we were under oppression, and it became legalism, right? And it didn't invite me with my call into that community. So God took me out of the Russian church. So I was trying to apply a bunch of ideas there.
That does make sense. And, the very ways in which we experience Christianity in liberating ways, if we're not careful, it can lead us to legalistic ways. And so all of a sudden we lose sense of the liberation that we experienced in Christ, and we start focusing more on the law, which doesn't save us in the first place. And then all of a sudden our churches become rigid, legalistic, judgmental, and not as liberating and empowering and releasing as they should be.
And Jesus came to do all that.
Right.
Right? And so I think it's always refreshing to look at the lens of what Jesus really came to do. And sometimes we're taught what Jesus came to do as laws. So it's kind of interesting to always unpack that.
Yes, indeed. Well, this has been rich to the point that, okay, I'm going to just ask you right now in front of all these people that you will come back for another episode of City Beats, because I feel like we talked about a number of things, but I feel like there's so much more we can explore here. And I just am honored and love being on team with you and seeing you utilize your gifts. And I'm challenged in great ways by you. And I just appreciate your regard for me, and at the same time, the ways in which you push and challenge me as I attempt to be a more reconciling, cross-cultural, justice-oriented, disciple-making pastor.
We're like the Avengers over here. Just kidding.
Yes,
it's a good sign.
And Black Widow's coming out soon. See,
and we're going to go see that together. And then we'll have another podcast episode and unpack Black Widow.
Yeah, I'm looking over here at Mark going, as we wind down, see how we just make our way back to superhero movies again in comic books. Man. That's how we're going to end.
I love it. Looking forward to that discussion.
Yes. So we will have you back again, but appreciate you, sister, so much.
I love you.
Blessings. Love you too. All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of City Beats. Again, if you have not, please subscribe on our YouTube channel, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Do both, okay? That way you can listen when you're just out taking a walk or something, but then you can watch it when you're at home on your iPad, on your iPhone or your Android, however you're doing that, okay? So, but I want you to tell people about it as well. We really do believe that the topics that we address here equip and empower people with the tools to be ambassadors of change and transformation in an ever-increasing multi-ethnic, multicultural, metropolitan reality. So again, thanks for joining us. Talk to you soon. God bless.